The private adoption process is full of trauma. From every single perspective throughout the triad, there is a need for understanding that trauma, healing that trauma, and learning how to process that. And in today's episode, we are going to be speaking with a trauma recovery coach. Her name is Stacy, who also happens to be an adoptive mom. She's going to share with us some tools and some resources that we can use to identify whether or not we have some trauma issues that we should process before we attempt the adoption process and bring our children home through adoption. If we haven't met yet, my name is Amanda, and I'm an adoptive mom. I'm on a mission to make your adoption easier and faster by teaching you how to adopt and helping you create and share your adoption profile. If you haven't taken a moment yet to do so, please subscribe and ring the little bell icon so that you'll get notified each and every time we release a new video. So before we dive into our conversation with Stacy, I want to share a little bit more about her background with you. Stacy is a trauma recovery coach. She helps you understand what might have happened in childhood or through your upbringing that might have you stuck in the process of life overall. This is especially important when we're talking about the private adoption process. You see, there's a lot of trauma that could have led you to adoption, and there's a lot of trauma that can happen to you through adoption. And all of those different mindset areas could be holding you back from really finding peace on your adoption journey. So let's take a moment to welcome Stacy to our show. Stacy, thank you so much for joining us today. Will you share a little bit more about yourself with our audience?
Sure. So I am an adoptive mom, first and foremost. My kids are 13 and a half and just shy of 18. So we've been in this for a very long time. But as a vocation, I'm actually considered a trauma recovery coach. So I've been doing that for a number of years. And I love educating people on what trauma actually is, because I think it's really misinformed, and help people understand why they or their loved ones may be stuck.
Can you share a little bit more about what trauma really is with us?
Sure, of course. So trauma is anything, absolutely anything that leaves you feeling insignificant, unseen, unheard, unimportant, or unsafe.
Wow.
So, when I'm working with my clients as a coach, so often people hear these terms, the big T and the little t, right? Big T would be something that, is very up in your face, traumatic, abuse, violence, aggression. And I'm talking specifically childhood trauma, right? You can have acute traumas too, like an accident or war or something environmental, but specifically to childhood trauma, people usually think of assault or a violation of some sort or an abuse as traumatic. And if they haven't had that in their life, but they're still very, very stuck in adulthood, it doesn't really make sense to them as to why. And so I'm often helping people recognize patterns from their childhood that left of experiences that left them feeling unseen or unimportant or unheard from the child's perspective, because the child doesn't have a rational brain until they're like 10, 12 years old. So anything that leaves them feeling unheard, unseen, unimportant, insignificant, or unsafe can be processed the same way a big T trauma would be in the body, because it ultimately leaves them feeling unsafe.
Wow, that is so much education, like jammed into 30 seconds. Like we're totally gonna have to unpack this.
Yeah.
And I think I'm excited you're here because I personally believe that there's a lot of trauma, right, in the adoption process.
100%.
Yeah. And I think it's well documented. It's definitely something that I always encourage my community to really dive deep into, to understand as we go into this process. But I also think, to your point, there's a whole host of potential traumatic events that could have happened getting there. Everything from childhood to maybe infertility, definitely
100%.
disruptions and all of the things, which you being an adoptive mama, you totally understand. And while I zoomed us straight into trauma, I do want to take a step back and hear a little bit more about your adoption story so that our audience can get to know you just a little bit better.
Of course. So I'm 50 years old now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great milestone, I think. So when I was 28, 29, I got married and very quickly wanted to start a family. It's something I had always wanted, and it just was not happening for us in a traditional way. So my husband and I went through a number of years of infertility. And for a variety of reasons, I did not feel that infertility treatments were going to be a good path for me. There had been a huge history in my family where women endured extra hormones by way of, say, hysterectomies or very, very early on, like 70s birth control. And it didn't fare well in my family. Most people ended up with some sort of fatal condition. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. Whether it was breast cancer or blood clotting, it didn't fare well. And so I had to really ask myself, what was it that I wanted? And what I knew I wanted was to be a mom. But I recognized pretty quickly when I did this little self-audit that being pregnant was not as important to me as being a mom. And though all of us who go through an infertility journey, it's a very, very lonely, sad, isolating experience, especially if you're trying to get pregnant in this age group where people are often getting pregnant.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Because as well as I know for me personally, it felt like I was failing a test every month. I'm doing all the things I'm being told to do.
Right.
And it's not happening. It is happening all around us. So it was a very, very, very tough time on a lot of levels. But once I made the decision for myself, because there was a lot of, as well as not being able to get pregnant, I had a lot of anticipatory anxiety about this idea of doing the infertility treatments because I knew it didn't fare well in my family.
Yeah.
So I felt like between a rock and a hard place. And I just remember saying to my husband, we were driving on an errand and I said, we're getting really close to this time frame that we had said we would wait X amount of months more. And I said, I don't think I can do the IVF or the IUI. I just don't think I can do it. And he said, well, what does that mean? Does that mean we don't have kids? And I said, no, I really think maybe I'm called to adopt. But then he needed to come to that. Right. So if you want to know, we had a really interesting way of doing that. Do you want me to share that with you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
For sure.
I think often women come to things quicker.
Yeah,
right?
I think so too. Yeah.
So, in my husband's defense, I had been mulling it in my head well before I had mentioned to him, I feel like I'm being called to adopt. So when I brought it to him, now he had to take that journey himself, but he's also much more analytical, much more black and white. I'm much more in the gray space. So when I first mentioned it to him, now I'm kind of on bated breath. Like, did you think about it? Did you think about it?
Right.
And then now that's extra pressure. So one day he came home from work and I said, okay, here's the deal. I definitely know I want to adopt, but I'm like 80% in. I still have my own concerns. I still have my own fears. I still have things that I need to get answered for myself. So I have a mason jar here and I have 10 stones and I've put 10 stones over here for you. And 8 of my stones are in right now. That means I'm 80% in. And you might see tomorrow there's 7 and maybe the next day there's 9. Like as I'm going through this journey, I'm going to put in and take out, but you'll know where I stand because you'll just see the stones. So I'm going to do the same thing with you. I'm not going to ask you anymore. And when I see that you're 9 or 10 in, we'll talk. And he was like, that's great. And so that's what we did. And it took about 4 months. And I had bought some books like Adoption for Dummies and all these different, things. Right. And I was moving around the house. And I went away with a girlfriend for the weekend. And I came back and he's like, I'm all in. So, it took probably 4 months, which in retrospect is not a long time. And then we went through, our own experience of trying to figure out for us as a couple what was important to us in that adoption journey. And then within a few months had selected Korea as a place that we wanted to adopt from.
So are both of your children adopted from Korea or?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can you tell us just from a purely educational perspective, a little bit of what that process was like for you?
I can. And I'll preface it with, my one is almost 18 and my one is almost 14. So I know it's probably not the same because it was different between the two, even, right? So what I can tell you is based on my experience from doing it in 2004 and 2009.
Great.
So in that experience, different from domestic, in an international adoption, when you are matched with a child, the parents' rights have already been severed.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So basically, I think some of the upfront is somewhat similar. You have a social worker that's assigned to you. They come and do home visits. That takes about 6 months. They write the report. And then that's sealed and that gets sent with your application to the agency in Korea. Gotcha. And then you kind of wait. Right.
Yeah.
And then then really in both of my cases, one was 9 months, one was a year, one was 9 months, one was 18 months for the match. When you get matched, you're basically getting a picture and they're like, congratulations, here's your child. And unless there's something like really extraordinarily significant, you take that match. Yeah. So it's kind of very serendipitous and faith-based and universally or divinely designed, in my opinion, right? Like it's just up next.
Wow.
So, with my youngest son or my oldest son, he was 8 weeks old when we were matched with him. And it was the only picture we ever saw of him until we laid eyes on him in person.
Wow.
And I know the process changed by the time we adopted our second child. And at that point in Korea, they're really trying to promote domestic adoption within Korea. And so at that time, and I don't know if it's the same now, a child had to be available for adoption in Korea for 5 months.
Mm.
So we could not get matched before 5 months.
Gotcha.
And then once you were matched, you could accept. And then at that point, in all those cases, once you accept, then it's a whole new host of paperwork, right? Because now you're adopting an immigrant orphan.
Right.
And they need to get a visa and they need to get a passport and they need to get all of those things in place. And that takes about another 4 months. So my youngest came home at 9 months old and my oldest came home at 6 months old.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. A completely different process for sure, but
very different.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that journey with us. I always think it's really interesting for us as a community to learn together about each other's journeys and the different types of adoption that exist. To your point, things change all the time. Totally understand that. But I still think that nonetheless, just the process overall is really interesting. But having been through that as an adoptive mom, I'm sure you have some pointers for us on how to really prepare for trauma in the entire process, everything for ourselves, but also for our kiddos that we're going to be bringing home as well. Can you share a little bit more about that?
I can. And I wish I knew then what I know now.
Right? Tell me about it. Amen. That is why I do this.
Holy moly. And we really weren't well informed, and not to the fault of the agency. I'm not really quite sure what they share and what they don't share, but it's so obvious to me as a trauma recovery coach what I'm looking at in my own children. So earlier we were talking about this big T, little t, right? So one thing I didn't mention in our process is that one of the reasons that we chose Korea is because they really primarily use a foster care system. And in our process, that was a very important thing to us. When we were looking at doing international adoption, it was our thought at the time, and I can't say it's any different, but at the time our thought was foster care may help child development wise for the child. So we were looking at the healthcare system. How often do they go to the doctor? How in alignment is the healthcare system and the medical system with the United States system, vaccine wise, treatment wise, all of that. So it would be an easier transition. But we were also looking, do we want to do orphanage? Do we want to do foster care? We took a lot of these things into consideration. And one of the reasons why we chose Korea was because there was a foster care system for the children. That being said, the way that they do it, at least at that time, was your child would be placed into the system in the city or the area of the country that they were born in. So using our country for an example, you're in Arkansas, I'm in New Jersey. If the headquarters for the agency, say, was in the New York, New Jersey area, but the child was born in Arkansas, they would place the child in a foster care home in Arkansas.
Oh.
And then once the child was matched with the family, they would then move them to say where the headquarters are, because this is where their main medical facility was. So imagine they would get moved to New York. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Just using this as like an example, because both of my children were like pretty significantly far from Seoul, which is the capital and where all of the main headquarters were.
Gotcha.
Okay. So in my older son's case, he was born, he was in foster care, and then was matched with us at 8 weeks old, and then was moved to Seoul, and then was there for 4 months, and then was moved here.
Wow.
So by the time he was 6 months old, we were his third family. That's 3 ruptures, right? From the birth mother to the first foster care family to the second foster care family. So really has been in 4 arms by the time he's 6 months old. My younger son, there was something that happened when he was at his first foster care placement, didn't work. So he had 2 foster care placements in Busan, where he was from. It would be like Florida to New York, right? And then moved to Seoul and then came to us. So by the time he was 9 months old, we were his 4th family. That I had no concept of how significant of an impact that was going to have on my child.
Yeah.
And it did have a significant impact. I'm not even sure that they're aware of that.
Really? Because it's just, they're normal, right? They wouldn't know any different at that moment because they're so young.
No, I mean, look, I can clearly see now the impact that it had, and I can see the impact it has on them now. Both struggle with anxiety. There has been depression bouts in and out. And, the reality is if you think about it, just think about it. Let's use Arkansas and Florida as an example. A child doesn't really know what a parent is. They definitely know the person that they're with is not the person that they were with for 9 months prior.
Right.
Right. The voice is not the same. The connection's not the same. Your body knows that. There's no question about that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right.
Okay. So now they're with this caretaker who they can just, as long as their needs are being met, fed, hydrated,
right,
cared for, clean, roof over the head, and most importantly, connection and love, nurturing, they're not making a discrimination, right?
Right.
But now all of a sudden you're moved to another home. That other person's gone. You're terrified.
Yeah.
Where's my person? The smells are different. The sounds are different. I don't recognize these voices. I don't recognize these people. Where are my people? The only concept that an infant can come up with it must be me. They're not aware of any kind of process and plan in place.
Right. That's a good point.
And then it happens again.
Yeah.
So think about what happens. Huh?
That's heartbreaking. Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
None of that ever occurred to me.
Me
and none
either.
of that was ever shared with me.
Yeah.
And when I talk to my peers of people, because, you get put into these forums and you meet these people along the way. When I talked to the people I was connected with and we were going through this process at the same time, and now our children are the same age, we're all challenged with very similar challenges with 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Very similar. And we can all see the connection. But it's not really our job to tell our children the connection because they have their own journey they need to figure out.
Right. Yeah.
So we can only hold space and be as informed as we can and make the right choices and use the right language on our side.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening with the child is it inherently becomes this message of, I must not be enough. No way for them to have the concept of, oh, I'm just on a journey and I'm going to end up with my forever family.
Right.
This is just a part of the process. There's no possible way that they can get that concept. No possible way.
So how do you prepare for that as an adoptive parent? How do you make that?
So if I had known, so there's two things. I have another friend, dear friend of mine, one of my best friends, who at the same time we ended up going through adoptions, and she ended up adopting from Haiti while I was adopting from Korea the first time. And she adopted twin boys.
Wow.
And we were just talking about this the other day. And I said, I wish I had known. And she goes, but even if someone was telling you, would you have really believed it? I was like, no.
Yeah.
Because I would have thought, oh, that's just your experience. But it won't happen with me because I'm going to have this really loving home.
Right.
Right. You just don't understand this nature versus nurture component. And there's parts of it that we will never have control over. And so we have to hold space. So if I could tell my older self, if I was going into the future, what I would have wanted to know is no matter how much of a loving home you have, there will always be something that your child is going to be seeking. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's part of the understanding of adoption. Adoption is forever.
That's right.
Right. And so I wouldn't do it any differently in the sense that I would never not adopt. It was absolutely the way I was supposed to raise my family. There's no question about that. I can't even say zero regrets because it's like in the negative. Like that's not the concern. What I would say is be mindful that your children are on a journey. And your job as the parent of choice by God, the universe, whatever it is that you believe in, your job is to be there and create the most loving, understanding, caring, informed space possible.
Yeah.
Because you will need that. They're going to need a soft place to land, and they're going to need to learn how to regulate relationally, emotionally, and to not take it personally as a parent.
Yeah.
Right? Because whatever it is that they're working through internally, it's not about you.
Agreed.
That's their journey. And as long as you say to them in any way that it feels best for you, we're all on our own journeys in this life. My husband's on his own from me, right? We're all on our own journeys. We're collectively supporting each other through our own journeys in this family. And there's nothing you can ever say or do that will ever change my love.
That's right.
Right. And we're all here for the highs, the lows of it. But it's important for parents to recognize there are higher rates of anxiety. There can be higher rates of depression. There are higher rates of ADHD.
Yeah.
And a big reason for that is when you go through trauma and something really scary in your lifetime, and you're doing it over and over and over again as an infant, the part of your brain that is the alarm center, your amygdala, is going to grow. But while that amygdala is growing, something has to kind of go offline a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you can't have two parts of the brain active at the same time. The part of the brain that tends to go a little bit more offline is your prefrontal cortex. That's where all of your executive function is. And that is very much in alignment with ADHD. So very often you're going to see that. And another really important thing for people to understand, and this is something people can find if they follow Gabor Mate, who is a traumatologist, if you will. He's an MD, but his specialty is trauma. He will share so eloquently that because of neuroplasticity, and when you're an infant, your brain is rapidly firing, right? Because it's growing exponentially.
Right.
Any experience that you have from the ages of 0 to 2 are very significant. So if you have some sort of traumatic experience from the ages of 0 to 2, it's going to be so exponentially powerful that if everything from 2 to 12 is happy-go-lucky, you may find yourself more challenged than somebody who had a great 0 to 2, but 2 to 12 was a mess.
Oh, wow.
So when people say, oh my God, well, they were just too young to remember, it couldn't have affected them. The body keeps the score. And I can't, that's a book with a brilliant title
Right.
by Bessel van der Kolk, who is also a specialist in trauma, but it really is so true. The body does keep the score. As a trauma recovery coach, one of my best tools is hypnosis. And I use hypnosis a lot with my clients. With a very specific therapeutic model called RTT. And it's very amazing what can come out between the ages of 0 and 2, because not only does the body keep score, but the mind, the memory does keep a full tally of what it knows. I've had people even go back to the womb.
Wow. And so through your use of hypnosis, it's possible to heal the things that happen between 0 and 2, or learn tools to process through them, or?
So yes and yes. So here's what happens. Okay. So people that are watching, I'm like, I'm taking off my glasses.
Here we go.
I get real.
Like pull up the sleeve.
So what happens is when we're very, very young, and our rational brain is not fully developed, and we're very egoistic, and everything has to revolve around us, right? That's just the nature of development. We will make these agreements that, let's just use example, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving, I'm unimportant, if that should be the case for someone. But once you make that agreement and you create this core belief based on this feeling, because the core beliefs are never based on rational thinking.
Right, of course.
They're based on feeling. You now see yourself, others, and your entire world through this fractured lens, through this filter. So what happens in hypnosis, and specifically the methodology I use is rapid transformational therapy, is I'm able to get people to look at this experience, start to connect the dots of what they came to me challenged with in adulthood and how it connects, and get them to see they're not 3 anymore. They're not 2 anymore. They're not 18 months anymore. They're not 8 anymore. They're 55.
Right.
And this was the decision that the 1-year-old came up with, or the 5-year-old came up with, or the 7-year-old came up with. And they're able to start to reframe it and interrupt it by acknowledging it's not true because it's not them, that they're not in that spot anymore. And now they can flip the lens, if you will, and put on a new filter, one that's more in alignment with today's truth and what it is that they do want, which is feeling worthy, enough, deserving, confident, whatever it is that has them stuck. Because it's those things that yield things like anxiety, depression. These are manifestations of something at a core.
Right.
I'm not enough.
Yeah.
Right. So what we're doing is we're really helping them understand the connection, help them start to process it. That is the beginning of the healing. And then I continue to coach them. So I coach them prior, then we do this deep hypnosis, and then we coach again. Now, when these old triggers would come up, that yield this unworthiness, that yield all these results and actions and outcomes in their life, we can start to work towards a different thought, and a different feeling and a different reaction and a different outcome for them.
This is so fascinating. In my brain, I'm listening to everything you're saying, and I'm having this whole dialogue about, my son, my daughter, myself, like all of the things, right? Are just going through here. But I think even as you go through the adoption process, there are still triggers, right, that are coming back that are triggering off of these things that would have happened to you as a child that the
No doubt.
this can pull forward in you as an adult.
Especially so, we've been talking about the adoptee.
Right.
But when you talk about the adopter, let's just think about it. It's frustrating when you can't, if your initial desire is to build a family by way of pregnancy.
Right.
And it's not working. And you're already coming into it not thinking you're enough, or you're already coming into it feeling unworthy, or you're already coming into it with imposter syndrome or not feeling deserving or with a low self-esteem. This is going to be a massive trigger.
Yeah.
Because the messaging you're going to be giving to yourself is, you see, I knew it. Good things can't happen for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's another level of trauma on top of trauma.
That's right.
That can be very, very difficult, because it can be that unearthing of the validation, because we're always seeking validation for our beliefs. Right. And that's a big one. It's not true, because the reality is you are enough and you are worthy and you are deserving. And this is not connected to that at all.
Right.
Right. So yeah, it can be really on either side.
Yeah. I mean, I remember that through our own journey. We went through IUI into IVF, and we realized that IVF wasn't going to be the road. And then I too had either we're going to go further down this path or we're going to stop and we're going to move forward. And then we went into adoption, and we had a disruption at 7 days. And it was just, to your point, it was just trauma piling on trauma, piling on trauma. And that is something that I see in our community. And honestly, that's why I'm so grateful you were willing to come on the show and talk with our community, is because I am not certified to heal those. I've been through my own journey, and I can spot, like, in the most loving and kind way, I think that's an area you need to do some work in, right? But like, go find the right person. And I definitely, given your background and obviously your expertise, you are the right person for our community to come and seek out and really have that conversation on a deeper level. Because when you can focus on yourself, and you touched just briefly on it earlier, when you can see that what's happening around you is not because of you, and you process it through a healthier lens, quite honestly, it makes, I find, life a bit more smooth, a bit more enjoyable, right? But then I can properly focus on helping my family develop in the way that I want it to, when I'm really putting the right lens versus maybe that fractured filter that we talked about a bit earlier.
Yeah. And that's why, I named my business Flip Your Mindset. And my tagline is, I help you see your life through a new lens.
Yeah.
Because the reality is we are all looking through fractured lenses. I became a coach in this nature because of my own chronic childhood trauma, right? Like, nobody really gets into this just because they think it would be cool.
Right.
People come into it because, they've had their own experiences and their own aha moments. But as I dug deeper, while I was doing this, I had one in high school, one in middle school. And I can say this, and I don't say it to scare. I say it to empower, really, to give you extra knowledge. And once I recognized this myself, there were a few families in my town who had done international adoption that I was like, come here, I need to tell you this. I started to see, and it was confirmed by other people in my community, that around 12, everything started to shift for my kids. Because hormones are starting to kick in, your self-identity is starting to kick in, whether it's domestic and you're the same race, or it's domestic and you're not the same race.
Right.
In my case, international, not the same race. There is something that happens with the kids where they're starting to they're spending more time looking at themselves in the mirror. And they're starting to recognize they're a little bit more I hate to use the term, but it's really the best term, woke to their differences. When they're in elementary school, it's bliss. It's like ignorance is bliss. They're not really paying attention. They don't see the differences.
Yeah.
When they start to get into middle school, not only do they see the differences, but the curriculum forces some people to see the differences. Mm-hmm. So I'll give some examples, and I do this to prepare people, right? Mm-hmm. So in the same week of 7th grade, my son called me upset from school. The first one was he was in history, and they were doing as soon as he told me we're doing an immigration project, I already knew what he was going to say because I'd already been through it with my other child. Oh. Today we started the immigration project at school. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they said we need to go home and talk about our immigration story. Okay. And I just thought to myself, Mom, you know what? You can do this. I've done this before. We did this in elementary school. And this is what my son's telling himself. You've done this before. You'll just use mom and dad's story. And then he said, but then the teacher said, there's not one kid in this classroom whose parent, grandparent, or great-grandparent did not immigrate here. And you need to go home and find out that story. And he looked at me because I ended up going to pick him up. He was so upset. And he said, I came here by myself when I was 9 months old. And I said, you sure did. And he was sobbing. Yeah. And I said, and how does that make you feel? And he said, really sad. Mm-hmm. And it's like at that age, it's that 12, 13, 14-year-old age where they're starting to be a little bit more aware of like, is my birth mother sad?
Right.
There's like all this stuff that comes up. Now I have one kid that's super vocal about it, and I have one kid that's not. So that gets all super internalized.
Yeah.
Right. And then the story takes its own life.
Right.
Right. And then in that same week, in science, they were studying genetics.
Oh, no.
And my child was told that you need to see if you can roll your tongue or not. And if you can roll your tongue, you should go home and ask the parents if they can roll their tongue because it's a genetic predisposition.
Oh my goodness. Ugh.
So, it's innocent in and of itself.
Yeah.
But the reality is I went back to the school and I said, listen, as someone who's trauma informed, can I just give you some advice? Don't personalize it.
Yeah.
Keep the curriculum. Just say, hey, we're going to talk about immigration. Go home and interview someone.
Right.
It could be your neighbor. It could be a family member. Learn about someone's immigration story.
Yeah.
And the same with the rolling of the tongue. Go home and ask someone, or can you, whatever it is, it can be tweaked.
Right.
The reality is what I said to my son in that moment with regards to the immigration story. And I said, it's not an equitable assignment, because not only do you not have access to that information as an adoptee, but there are kids in your district that are in foster care. Mm-hmm. And that's very triggering for them because they can't go ask that question to the person that would know.
Right.
And there might be kids in your district whose parents are not here legally.
Yeah.
So I said, it's really not an equitable assignment. And that's what he went back and told his teacher the next day. He said, I can't do this assignment because it doesn't apply to me. And it's not equitable. So I share that because it's important for people who are listening that should they start to see a shift in behavior, in demeanor, if they start to see a shift like in their child's heart about how they're feeling, it's really not that unique to adopt, because this is when they're going to start to becoming really very aware and very aligned with their truth.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those stories. We had a similar situation when my daughter, before she even got to kindergarten, and they were working on family trees. Yeah. And she came home and she said, I want to include my birth mother here, but I'm not sure where to put her. And so that was a whole nother, conversation. And she's known since the time she was,
Of course.
old enough to even begin to understand, like, you grew here, you grew in my heart and not in my belly. And, those age appropriate languages all along the way. But she had this moment. And then we did the assignment, right? And she wrote it down and kind of drew out, what she wanted to communicate. And then the next morning on the way to school, she was pretty quiet. And I was trying to understand why, because that's not my daughter at all. She tends to be very bubbly and all of the things. And I said, hey, what's going on, honey? And she said, I don't know if I want to share it. And I was like, you know what? You don't have to share it. You can share whatever you want to share or not at all. It's up to you. But at that moment was when the shift started happening in me, that I needed to be, a little bit more aware, to your point, and make the space for the conversation. And then that was when I really began to understand she is a chatter at bedtime. That's totally a nurture thing, because that is totally me. But at bedtime, she wants to go over her day and talk about all the things. And then that's when she's going to bring out any of that unresolved emotion that she needs to talk about, because that's her safe space, that she knows that she's got dedicated focus time just on her. And so I have to remember, even in those hurried days, to get quiet and still and make this space for her so that she can process those feelings. And
I think that that's great. And I think, the other piece of advice I'd give to people is allow your kid to share.
Yeah.
And allow them to say whatever it is that they're feeling. And anyone, because we've all been raised this way. And now we're realizing why so many of us are challenged, and so stuck.
Right.
Because these things we would hear is, don't say that. You don't really feel that way.
Right.
Right? Think about that.
Yeah.
Oh, honey, no. You don't really feel that way. It's fine. No. It's fine. You don't want to say that.
Yeah.
Right. But guess what? They do want to say it.
Right.
And they want to know that they have a safe place to be able to say whatever it is that's on their heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it is what they want to say.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so just those little statements give the message of what you have to say is important.
Yeah.
And I want to hear it versus not. And so as soon as they start getting the message it's not, they're going to start to shut down. And trust me, you don't want them shut down, because in those teenage years, you want the lines of communication open as much as possible.
Yeah, I'm scared to death of those teenage years. I will fully admit it. I'm going to need your phone number on speed dial for sure. Like, what do I do? I don't know.
It's a learning process for all of it. And I am so grateful that I'm as informed as I am. And I'm equally super grateful that my husband's willing to hear all of it.
That's awesome. That's
right.
Huge.
And gets it, mainly because this is the environment I've created here, but he understands it. And that has helped us parent differently once we really started to understand. Because when I started seeing the shift in my son at 12, I didn't really know what I was looking at for the first one. I really had no idea. And it really wasn't until the second one went through a similar shift that I started to connect the dots. And I went, oh my goodness. And then I started reaching out to other moms that I knew with kids these age that were adopted, and recognized we were all seeing very similar things.
Wow.
But I didn't do that with the first one because there was a little shame associated with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, why is my kid challenged? Is it because of my parenting? Is it because of the kind of mom that I am? So that first one I did in isolation. The second time, once I started to recognize it, I started speed dialing other moms. And I started calling other moms who I knew had, this was interesting, many biological children, and then subsequently a number of adopted children after. And I said, listen, your kids are in elementary school and you've got kids in college and you have kids in high school. I'm telling you this now, so you're not so shell-shocked. But when it gets to middle school, it's going to be a different experience because these two kids were internationally adopted. You're going to expect it to be a little bit of a different experience than the other 5 that just went through.
Wow.
And she was like, thank you so much. And they were 3rd and 4th grade at the time. She goes, because I'm already starting to see the difference.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is a seasoned mom. She has 7 children.
Yeah. She knows what she's doing. Wow.
And she was already seeing the difference. Yeah.
Wow. Goodness, this has been so, so valuable. Are there any other subjects that we didn't touch on tonight that you think would be helpful for those that are in the waiting period to match and ultimately form their
I
family
mean,
through
it is
adoption?
different. I don't know if your audience is more primarily domestic adoption because you are an adoption profile expert. So I don't know that my international adoption experience is the same because it's a different process.
Yeah.
But what I would just say to people is adoption's amazing. And it is, and I said this to you before, it's beautiful, right?
Yes.
It's beautiful. It's so beautiful, but it comes with inherent grief.
Yeah.
And people that go in that don't want to hear that, it's going to be a little bit more challenging if you go in with it, not expecting that there's going to be challenges, but just being aware of my child is going to have at some point recognize that there's a major loss for them. That's going to be a great benefit for you to just be aware of that and be open to what that looks like for each individual child and meet them where they are with no judgment, and don't make it about you.
That's right. Don't make it about you.
It's nothing to do with you. You're just holding the space.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah. I think the biggest way you can not make it about you, honestly, is if you process your stuff while you're in this waiting period and ongoing even after, because let's be real, it's, again, it's brutal, right? It's not going to stop at the moment that the paperwork is signed. Trust me, I was very misinformed in my own journey. I thought, oh, baby's home. Like now, off to the easy part, but no, the emotions and everything that you go through as you hit those milestones. And, for me personally, I also carried that grief. I was like, oh, I want to share this with her. I want to tell her about this and, all of those types of things too. So do the work for yourself because it's ultimately going to benefit your family.
Well, it's like putting the oxygen mask on.
Yeah.
Right? On the airplane.
Yeah.
If you don't take care of yourself first, you're not going to be able to take care of the other people around you to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
And that's just the truth, adoption or not.
Yeah.
Right?
It is. It is for sure. Goodness. Well, thank you so much, Stacey, for joining us.
So welcome.
Where can our audience go to learn more about you and get connected with you?
Sure. So I'm very active on social media. And I just do it straight from my name. Just keep it super simple. So it's Stace Uhrig. It's Stacy with an EY. And my last name is Uhrig. Both on Instagram and Facebook. People can find me there. And then my website is flipyourmindset.com. Perfect. And I try to make it really explanatory as to what I do, how I do it, and the result that you can expect, which is really ultimately more peace in your life.
That's amazing. And who can't use more peace?
100%.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll be sure to link to everything in the show notes. So whether you're listening to the podcast or watching the YouTube, just scroll a little down and you'll see all of the links there to get in contact with Stacey. And again, as an adoptive mom who's just maybe is a smidge further along in the journey than some that might be listening, I really do encourage you to take a moment to focus on yourself. Think of it as your self-care. Think of it as your, learning to become a better parent. And in the waiting journey to really just focus on yourself and take a moment to get the resources you really deserve.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much, Stacey. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow is all I can say. I don't know about you guys, but I found today's conversation with Stacey incredibly informative and valuable. And honestly, this is a resource I wish I had at my fingertips when I was going through my own adoption journey. Learning how to process those triggers and that trauma from your childhood and from just, kind of the process of adoption in general, I know will make your adoption process much more peaceful. So I hope that you take the step to get the support you need and go check out Stacey and see all of the amazing tools that she has so that you can put those to work in your own adoption journey. Remember, anything's possible with the right plan and support, and get the right partners to support you along the way. I'll see you soon, friend.